The Young and the Restless spoilers Wednesday full episodes update August 27, 2025. Cain Ashby found himself once again at the center of a storm, this time a storm more intense than any before. The unrelenting weight of Victor Newman's accusations hung over him like an impenetrable cloud. Victor, always calculated and cold, had decided that now was the time to publicly dismantle Cain's reputation, the way only Victor knew how. He had already made it clear that this would be the final game, Cain's last trick, or at least that's how he saw it. Victor, never one to pull punches, had boldly and publicly accused Cain of using dirty money to purchase up all the prime real estate in Genoa City. It was a shocking revelation to many, but for Cain, it was like a well-aimed shot straight to the heart of everything he had worked to build. The accusation itself was nothing short of a bombshell, one that was bound to reverberate throughout the city's elite circles. In his own usual style, Victor delivered the blow with an air of indifference, like it was just another day in the office. His ability to make such a serious accusation and maintain such composure only made it worse for Cain. As Victor spoke, Cain could feel the eyes of Genoa City's most powerful figures on him, waiting for him to either sink or swim. And swim, Cain would, he had no choice. However, the twist in this chess match wasn't just Victor's bold claim, it was the ripple effect that would follow. Lily Winters, Cain's wife, would soon find herself deeply involved. In her own right, Lily was a force to be reckoned with, and her patience had run thin. She had spent enough time blindly trusting Cain, but now, in the face of Victor's bold claim, her faith was faltering. The growing doubts and fears she had long pushed aside started resurfacing. Cain had told her that his wealth and acquisitions were all legitimate, that he had done things the right way. But Victor's accusations were too precise, too personal, and Lily couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that maybe she had been in the dark for far too long. Desperately wanting answers, Lily sought out Holden Novak. He was someone who had been in Cain's orbit for some time, but his knowledge of the situation, just like Damian King's, was suspect. But that didn't stop Lily from confronting him. She needed answers, and she needed them now. What did Holden know? Was he in on Cain's scheme? Had he been part of it, or was he just another pawn in a much larger game that she was only beginning to understand? Holden, for his part, would be just as clueless as Damian had been. His knowledge of Cain's plans would be limited at best, and he would find himself at the receiving end of Lily's pointed questions. But like everyone else, Holden would be forced to reveal that he too had no idea about the extent of Cain's involvement in whatever scheme had led to the purchase of Genoa City's most coveted properties. Yet, as Lily pressed him harder, there would be a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wouldn't believe Holden's denial, not at first. He may not know the full extent of Cain's actions, but that wouldn't stop her from looking for something, anything, that might give her the answers she was desperately seeking. The distrust that Lily felt toward Cain would only grow stronger. The more she probed into his past actions, the less convinced she would be of his innocence. She had been down this path before with Damian, but this time, it felt different. This time, her instincts were screaming that Cain had been hiding more than just his past mistakes. He had buried a truth so deep that even he had trouble recalling it. The mask he had worn for so long was starting to crack, revealing a man who wasn't just in over his head, but possibly someone who had been playing a dangerous game from the very beginning. As Lily's suspicions grew, Clare Newman, too, would find herself tangled in a web of lies and deceit. She wasn't about to let Kyle Abbott off the hook so easily. She had been tracking his every move, watching him closely as he navigated the fallout from his family's involvement in the world of business and power. Claire had already heard whispers about his connection to Audra Charles, and she wasn't about to let him slip away without telling her the whole truth. Her interrogation of Kyle would be no less intense than Lily's confrontation with Holden. Claire would demand answers about Audra, about Kyle's role in the events that had transpired, and about the secrets he had been keeping from everyone, including her. She wanted to know everything, every detail, no matter how small. And if Kyle didn't come clean, there would be consequences. Claire wasn't the type of person to shy away from confrontation, and she was prepared to make Kyle's life difficult if he didn't cooperate. Kyle, for his part, would find himself in a difficult position. He wasn't about to let Clare in on the full extent of his involvement with Audra, especially not if it meant jeopardizing his family's interests. But at the same time, he knew that Clare wasn't someone who could easily be fooled. The pressure would mount, and he would be forced to walk a fine line between protecting his own interests and placating Clare's relentless need for answers. Victor, ever the puppet master, knew exactly what he was doing. His accusation against Cain wasn't just a random attack, it was a calculated move in a much larger game. By forcing Cain into a corner, Victor was not only testing his resolve but also trying to provoke a reaction. It was a strategy designed to break Cain's spirit and force him to reveal the truth. And Cain, for his part, would likely fall into Victor's trap. His anger, his frustration, and his pride would push him to confront Victor head-on, giving Victor exactly what he wanted, an explosive reaction. But what Cain didn't realize was that Victor was playing a much deeper game, one that involved more than just him. The true stakes of this battle were far higher than Cain could have imagined, and the fallout from this confrontation would reverberate throughout Genoa City for months to come. The twisted web of lies, betrayal, and power struggles was only just beginning to take shape. As Victor and Cain clashed, Lily's mistrust of her husband would only intensify, and the walls between them would grow higher. What once seemed like a minor misunderstanding would evolve into a full-blown crisis, with every character involved feeling the weight of their decisions. Whether it was Holden's uncertain knowledge, Claire's relentless pursuit of the truth, or Kyle's attempts to protect his secrets, everyone in Genoa City would find themselves drawn into the chaos. In the end, Cain would have to face the music. The truths he had been hiding for so long could no longer stay buried, and he would have to decide whether to confront his past and risk everything, or continue living a lie that could ultimately destroy him and everyone he loved. But as with all great soap operas, nothing is ever as it seems, and the surprises that await Cain, Lily, and everyone else in Genoa City will be nothing short of earth-shattering. The saying "be careful what you wish for" resonates deeply with this storyline, especially as every character's thirst for knowledge comes with a heavy price. Everyone wants to uncover a truth, but in this world of secrets and deception, that knowledge can cost them more than they ever imagined. In this case, Lily's desire to understand the full extent of Cain's actions, his past, his lies, and the dark dealings he's been involved in, will be her undoing. She's not as angry with Kyle as she might have been, but she would certainly be livid if he lies to her, if he hides the truth, or if he fails to be transparent when it matters most. She understands him well enough to know when he's holding something back. She knows when the mask slips, and that's when she starts to doubt everything. But even more, she fears what happens when she confronts the truths that have been buried for so long. The timing, however, is key. Kyle's delay in opening up to her makes sense. He's caught between wanting to protect her and fearing the impact that truth could have on her and their future. But as the pressure mounts, especially with the looming shadow of Victor's manipulative tactics and Cain's calculated power plays, the moment for Kyle to speak up may be slipping away. Does he seize the opportunity to be open, honest, and vulnerable, or does he continue to build walls, hoping to protect Lily from the fallout? Everything they've been through together makes this moment even more charged. Their history is rife with drama and manipulation. Cain's disappearance and faked death set the stage for the endless twists and turns that have kept their relationship on the edge of collapse for years. He had lured Lily into a psychiatric hospital under false pretenses, staged a series of tragic events, and yet she had always come back to him. Their turbulent love story, a mix of passion and chaos, never seemed to have a happy ending. They had married twice, divorced twice, and together they had raised twins Charlie and Maddie Ashby. This history was far from simple, and Lily could never truly escape it. Now, Cain returned as a billionaire, one who had carefully built an empire under a false identity inspired by a beloved book from their children's youth. He had recreated himself to prove he was worthy of Lily's love, but was it all just for her? His motivation had always been wrapped in a dangerous mix of obsession and desire for validation, and his actions had always left deep scars. For Lily, who had already lived through betrayal and heartbreak, this new persona of Cain was more than just a reemergence. It was a reminder of the lengths he was willing to go to prove he could change, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. The notion of Lily not being able to stop herself from delving deeper into Cain's business dealings speaks volumes. It's not just curiosity, it's survival. It's muscle memory from more than a decade spent with a man whose secrets she was never fully allowed to understand. As much as she might have wanted to forget it, their years together had taught her the harshest lessons about deceit, power, and the price of knowledge. Each moment with him, each action, had prepared her to dig deeper into his empire to uncover the truth. But here's the tragedy: Lily never stopped trying to trust him, even after everything he had put her through. She had loved him through the lies, the chaos, and the pain. The complicated history between them made her questions harder to face, and now, as they were both standing at the precipice of yet another revelation, she couldn't help but feel both connected and completely betrayed. Lily's mind would spiral as she navigated her feelings for Cain. Was it all a manipulative game, or had there been real love buried beneath the layers of lies? Could she ever truly trust him again? Was the new Cain really the man he appeared to be, or was he still the same man who had torn her life apart once before? And Cain, in his own self-centered way, believed that by becoming a billionaire and achieving the wealth and power he always thought he lacked, he could finally earn Lily's love. He had built an empire, not for power or fame, but for validation, a gift for Lily, as though it could erase the past and prove his worth. It was like the Great Gatsby, a man trying to recreate his life, and in doing so, possibly forgetting the very thing that made him a man worthy of love in the first place, his authenticity. But as Victor's accusations loomed over them and Lily's suspicion grew, Cain's plan was in danger of collapsing. He had created a perfect facade, but beneath it, the cracks were beginning to show. Lily, though caught in her own emotional whirlwind, would soon realize that the lies had only become bigger with time, and now, they could consume them both. Now, the question becomes whether Cain will be able to confront his past with Lily, or whether the lies will eventually become too much to bear. Would Lily choose to face the truth of who Cain really was, finally understanding that in the end, the most powerful thing she could do was let go of the past? Could she finally choose herself, or would she fall back into the dangerous cycle of trying to fix a man who might never truly change? As the weight of the lies and secrets grows heavier, both Cain and Lily will be faced with decisions that will change their lives forever. But one thing is certain: be careful what you wish for, because the truth they seek may be far darker than either of them could ever have imagined. Lily Winter's anger at the Aristotle Dumas scam is palpable. And she has every right to be furious. Cain has lied about his identity, orchestrated a hostile takeover of multiple corporations in Genoa City, and may even be connected to the murder of Damian Cain. The betrayal is as deep as it gets, and any person would be justified in feeling utterly betrayed by Cain's deceit. Yet, there's a deeper layer to Lily's reaction, one that reveals a vulnerability she might not want to acknowledge. On the surface, Lily insists that she hates Cain, a sentiment she vocalizes with fervor and conviction. But it's hard to ignore the unspoken language in their exchanges. While her words say one thing, her body language tells a completely different story. In the heat of their confrontations, when she leans into him, her gaze speaks volumes, contradicting the anger she tries to project. There's a tension in the air, a palpable, unresolved chemistry that lingers between them, even when Lily declares she wants nothing more to do with him. It's the kind of sexual tension that cannot easily be hidden, and it's clear that Lily, despite herself, is drawn to him, her anger rooted in much more than betrayal. It's emotional, yes, but it's also physical, and it's something neither of them can quite escape. So, does this mean Lily has softened toward Cain? Has the seemingly impenetrable wall of resentment started to crumble, revealing a deeper, more complicated emotional truth? When someone is angry yet unable to fully distance themselves from the object of their fury, it's often a sign of a connection that goes beyond simple hatred. The desire to know everything about Cain's plans, his motives, his movements, shows that Lily cares, perhaps more than she's willing to admit. It's that subtle obsession with uncovering his every secret that gives her away. This dynamic sets the stage for what could become one of the most explosive reunions in soap opera history. The confrontations between Lily and Cain have always been intense, but if their unresolved feelings, both anger and attraction, continue to boil beneath the surface, we're bound to see a confrontation that is nothing short of fiery. The words exchanged will be sharp, full of heated declarations, and possibly punctuated by some property damage. After all, this is soap opera territory. And when Cain and Lily reconnect, they don't do anything halfway. There will be passion, resentment, and everything in between. But let's take a step back. Lily might question and interrogate every employee of Cain's empire, grilling Phyllis until she can't take another breath, and even throwing around her wealth and power to demand answers. But there's one thing she can't deny: she's not fooling anyone, especially not herself. A woman who truly hates a man wouldn't waste so much energy trying to understand every move he makes, dissecting every gesture, every word. She wouldn't go out of her way to dig into his plans, asking questions that don't even pertain to her. If Lily hated Cain the way she claims, she would have closed the door on him long ago and left no room for his influence. But she can't seem to help herself, can she? The way Lily looks at Cain when she thinks no one is watching says it all. Her gaze is not just one of contempt or anger, it's more layered, full of longing, curiosity, and a hint of desire. No amount of interrogation can mask the truth behind her eyes. Deep down, Lily knows that her feelings for Cain are far more complicated than she's willing to admit. In this battle of wills, it's clear that both Lily and Cain are trapped in a web of unresolved emotions. Their history together is too deep, their bond too complicated to just walk away from without leaving scars. Cain's lies and his betrayal may have pushed them to this breaking point, but the undercurrent of passion and unresolved tension keeps pulling them back toward each other. And while Lily may want to believe that she can sever all ties with Cain, the truth is, she hasn't been able to let him go, not completely. This unresolved tension, the mix of hate and desire, will undoubtedly lead to a dramatic, emotional confrontation. But whether they tear each other apart or find a way to rebuild from the ashes of their past remains to be seen. What's clear is that their relationship is far from over. And the next chapter promises to be as volatile, complicated, and irresistible as the characters themselves. Victor Newman, a master of manipulation and control, had been playing the long game all along. His latest move was not just about gaining leverage over Cain Ashby, it was about dismantling the empire that Cain had worked so hard to build, brick by brick. Cain, caught in his own web of ambition, had unwittingly given Victor the ammunition he needed to destroy everything Cain had fought for. And now, Victor had come to collect. It all started with a long-buried secret, one that was more dangerous than Cain could have ever imagined. Victor knew that Cain's rise to power had not been as clean-cut as it appeared. Beneath the polished exterior of his business empire lay a dark history, one tied directly to Cain's father, Colin. Colin Ashby had been a con artist, a man with a reputation for deceiving anyone in his path, leaving a trail of ruin in his wake. Cain, in his desire to separate himself from his father's shadow, had worked tirelessly to build a legitimate business empire. But that history, one filled with shady dealings and crooked investments, had a way of coming back to haunt him. Victor had always kept his ear to the ground, and it wasn't long before he uncovered the damning truth. A substantial portion of Cain's fortune had been built on the very money that Colin had stolen in one of his most notorious scams. The arabesque investment was one of the key pieces of evidence in Victor's hand. It wasn't just a coincidence that the funding for Cain's expansion into new markets came from a pot of money that had been siphoned off in a fraudulent scheme. This connection, buried deep in the financial records, could destroy Cain's credibility and reputation in an instant. And Victor knew that the key to Cain's downfall lay in exploiting this connection to the past. Victor's plan was methodical and ruthless. Armed with the will of Colin Ashby, who had, at one time, been a thorn in his side. Victor took it upon himself to use this weapon of destruction to force Cain's hand. Cain had no idea just how deeply Victor had been digging into his past. When Victor finally confronted him, Cain was blindsided by the accusations. The proof of Colin's criminal empire, wrapped up in documents and financial records, was laid bare before him. "You didn't think you could outrun your father's legacy forever, did you?" Victor's voice was cold, calculated, and full of venom as he placed the documents in front of Cain. The look in his eyes was one of triumphant satisfaction, watching his adversary squirm under the weight of the truth. Cain's world, which had been carefully constructed over the years, was beginning to crumble, piece by piece. Cain's reaction was one of disbelief. He could barely comprehend what was happening. He had worked so hard to separate himself from his father's crimes, to prove that he was nothing like the man who had betrayed so many people. He had built an empire, one that had eventually gained respect in Genoa City and beyond. And now, in a single moment, Victor was threatening to destroy it all by exposing the connections to Colin's fraudulent past. "No," Cain protested, his voice cracking with the raw panic of someone whose carefully constructed life was about to shatter. "This isn't real. I've worked my entire life to build this empire. I didn't do this." He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the panic taking over as he scrambled to deny the accusations. But the evidence was undeniable, and Cain knew deep down that his denials wouldn't matter. In Victor's hands, the truth was a weapon, one that would easily tear down everything he had worked for. Victor, however, was unrelenting. "It doesn't matter whether you did it or not," he said, his voice unwavering. "What matters is what the world will think when this comes to light. You're not as untouchable as you think, Cain. One wrong move, and your entire empire will collapse under the weight of your father's crimes." Victor's threat was clear. He would expose Cain's past, dragging his name through the mud, unless Cain agreed to align himself with Victor in his battle against Jabot. Victor's cunning had brought Cain to this crossroads, forcing him to choose between his legacy and his future. If Cain refused, the world would know just how deeply his empire had been tainted by Colin's fraud. His reputation would be forever tarnished, and all the progress he had made would be rendered meaningless. The ultimatum was devastating. Cain had spent years trying to distance himself from his father's shadow, fighting to build something real, something legitimate. And now, in one fell swoop, Victor was threatening to obliterate it all. But Cain had never been one to back down from a fight, even when the odds were stacked against him. At first, Cain tried to fight back. He argued with Victor, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. But Victor was prepared. He knew that Cain's pride would push him to resist, which is why he had ensured that the evidence he had gathered was irrefutable. Cain's only option now was to cooperate or face the public disgrace that would surely follow. Victor's offer was simple: join forces with him to take down Jabot, or face the very public collapse of everything he had built. It was a stark choice, one that would require Cain to swallow his pride and make a decision that would change the course of his life forever. If Cain chose to refuse, he risked not only losing his business but also the trust and respect of everyone in Genoa City. For Cain, the weight of the decision was crushing. He had always prided himself on his independence, his ability to build something from nothing. But now, Victor's machinations had him cornered, and the only way out was through a reluctant alliance with the man who had caused him so much grief over the years. In the end, Cain had no choice but to accept Victor's offer. Reluctantly, he agreed to work with Victor, hoping that he could find a way to regain control of his empire and restore his reputation in the process. But Cain's decision came with a heavy price. He would forever be indebted to Victor, caught in the web of manipulation and power that Victor had so carefully woven. As Cain shook hands with Victor, sealing the deal, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the past crushing down on him. The man who had tried to escape his father's legacy had now become entangled in a new web of deceit and power struggles. His empire, once a symbol of his hard work and determination, was now a tool in Victor's hands, a pawn in the ruthless battle for dominance in Genoa City. The question now was not whether Cain could rebuild, but whether he could ever truly escape the shadow of his father's crimes. Would he be able to reclaim his empire on his own terms, or would he remain forever tied to Victor's manipulative grip? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: Cain's world would never be the same again. Cain Ashby had once prided himself on the empire he had built, brick by brick, meticulously distancing himself from the shadow of his father, Colin. Yet now, in the aftermath of Victor Newman's ruthless campaign, his world was unraveling faster than he could keep up with. Victor, with his characteristic cold precision, had framed Cain's fortune as nothing more than a byproduct of stolen money, a mere extension of Colin's fraudulent legacy. The carefully constructed facade of legitimacy Cain had worked tirelessly to build was now shattered, and the personal and professional consequences of Victor's onslaught were growing more destructive by the hour. Cain's life had always been a balancing act, teetering on the edge of success and scandal, but this was different. The stakes were no longer just about business or even his own survival. The destruction of Cain's name was also the destruction of his family, his children, who had once looked up to him, now refused to forgive him for the lies he had told. Charlie and Maddie, his twins, who had known Cain as the man who had given them stability, were now caught in the storm of their father's choices. Their disappointment and anger cut deep, and no matter how hard Cain tried to explain or make amends, the damage was done. Their broken trust was one wound that no amount of money or success could heal. He had failed them in the most fundamental way possible, as a father. Lily, too, was a source of pain for Cain. The woman he had loved, married twice and divorced twice, and built a family with, now looked at him with disdain and heartbreak. Her condemnation of his choices was as sharp as it was final. Every word she spoke was a reflection of the trust she could no longer place in him, and every accusation she threw his way was a reminder of how far he had fallen from the man she once believed in. She had always stood by him, supported him through thick and thin, but now she saw him for what he had become, a man who had sacrificed his integrity for power, who had been willing to sell a piece of his soul to build his empire. There was no coming back from this for Lily. Cain knew that, but it didn't stop the ache in his chest every time he saw the disappointment in her eyes. As the weight of the scandal pressed in from all sides, Cain felt the loss of his allies, too. The people who had once stood by him, who had helped him climb the corporate ladder, were now questioning his judgment. Doubt clouded their eyes whenever they spoke of him. They had stood with Cain through every business deal, every win, every loss. But now, with Victor's attack bringing his past to light, those same allies were retreating into silence. Cain knew that loyalty in business was fragile, but the realization that the people who had helped him build his empire could so easily turn their backs on him was a bitter pill to swallow. The most cutting blow of all, though, came from Victor's framing of Cain as nothing more than a reflection of his father. Victor's ability to twist the truth and paint Cain as the heir to Colin's legacy was a masterstroke in destruction. Cain had spent years, his entire adult life, fighting to separate himself from his father's crimes, trying to prove that he was not like Colin. But with one stroke of Victor's hand, that effort was in vain. Cain's reputation, his legacy, was irrevocably linked to Colin's, and Victor made sure the world knew it. Cain had never wanted to be anything like Colin, but in Victor's eyes, in the eyes of Genoa City and beyond, Cain had become the very thing he feared the most, a product of the same deception, greed, and manipulation that defined Colin's life. Now, with his family fractured and his reputation in tatters, Cain was left with no leverage, no safety net. The empire he had built was crumbling beneath his feet, and with it, every hope he had for redemption. His wealth, his influence, none of it mattered if he couldn't protect the core of what had driven him to succeed, his integrity and the love of those closest to him. But Victor had taken it all. Cain's situation had reached a point of no return. His choices were no longer about what was right or wrong, they were about survival. There were two paths before him, each more painful than the last. The first option was to surrender to Victor, to bow to his will and become a pawn in Victor's campaign against Jabot. Cain would be forced to play by Victor's rules, to work with the man who had orchestrated his downfall, aligning himself with the very force that had nearly destroyed him. In return, Victor would allow Cain to maintain some semblance of power, but at a steep price. Cain would lose his autonomy, his pride, and his dignity. The man who had worked so hard to build something for himself would become nothing more than a cog in Victor's machine. The second option was to resist, to fight back and try to preserve what was left of his empire and his reputation. But that path would come with its own consequences. If Cain chose to fight Victor, to take a stand, the full extent of his father's crimes, and his own complicity in them, would be laid bare for the world to see. His empire, built on questionable foundations, would collapse, and Cain would be left with nothing. His business would fail, his family would be irreparably damaged, and his name would be tarnished forever. The public humiliation would be complete. Cain knew that neither choice was truly a victory. No matter what he chose, he would lose something precious. His family, his business, his reputation, all of it hung in the balance. But the hardest part was knowing that he had no one to blame but himself. His decisions, his desperation to prove himself, had led him to this moment of reckoning. He had betrayed his own values, and in doing so, had betrayed the people who mattered most to him. In the end, Cain was faced with a harsh truth. The life he had worked so hard to build was built on shaky ground, and now, that foundation was crumbling. His choices had caught up with him, and there was no escaping the consequences. He had spent so long trying to prove he wasn't like Colin, but in the end, he had become the very thing he hated. And now, as the walls closed in, Cain would have to decide whether to bow to Victor's demands, becoming just another pawn in a ruthless game, or to resist, knowing that doing so would cost him everything. But whatever Cain chose, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. His empire was in ruins, his family was fractured, and his reputation was forever linked to the sins of the past. The man who had once stood at the pinnacle of success now found himself at the lowest point of his life, with no easy way out. The future of Cain Ashby, once bright with promise, was now uncertain, and the price of his past choices was one he would have to pay for the rest of his life. Phyllis Summers has always been known for her scheming nature, and in the world of the young and the restless, she never passes up an opportunity to stir the pot. Now, with the upcoming wedding of Danny and Christine just weeks away, Phyllis sees a golden opportunity to ruin their happiness. Whether it's for fun, revenge, or a bit of both, Phyllis is sure to concoct a plan to make Christine's big day far from perfect. Danny and Christine are blissfully unaware of the storm that Phyllis is about to unleash on their wedding plans. The couple is excited, with no reason to believe anything could go wrong. The wedding is set for October, just a few weeks away, and for Phyllis, there's plenty of time to plot her next move. And with her deep knowledge of Danny's family, Phyllis is perfectly positioned to cause the maximum amount of damage. Danny has already decided that his son, Daniel, will be his best man. Daniel, eager to support his father, agrees right away. And, given that Daniel is an aspiring musician, having been taught guitar by Tessa Porter, he even plans to perform a song he wrote for his father during the ceremony. This heartwarming gesture is a reminder of the bond between father and son, but it's also an opportunity for Phyllis to exploit. Daniel's participation in the wedding could stir up feelings in her that she's not ready to confront, especially when it comes to her tumultuous history with him. Meanwhile, Christine and her best friend, Lauren Fenmore, are on the hunt for the perfect wedding dress. Christine is overjoyed at the prospect of marrying Danny, but there's something that clouds her happiness: Phyllis. Phyllis, Daniel's ex and Christine's secret tormentor, has been lurking in the shadows, watching her every move. Though Christine may not be fully aware of Phyllis's intentions, she can't shake the feeling that the other woman is never far behind, ready to sabotage her joy at any moment. Phyllis's motives are clear. She wants to break up Christine's happiness and remind her that nothing, especially love, ever stays intact in her world. Phyllis may tell herself that she's doing this for fun or because she simply wants to make life harder for Christine, but in reality, it's about control. She has always craved the power to manipulate situations, especially when it involves the people she has loved or hated in the past. The wedding, an event meant to be filled with love and joy, is the perfect stage for Phyllis to wreak havoc. One of Phyllis's key moves may involve Daniel, as she knows how important he is to Danny. Daniel, still close to his father despite the complicated history between them, will have a significant role in the wedding. The idea that Daniel will play a song he wrote specifically for Danny on his guitar is a poignant moment, one that Phyllis can't resist turning into a battleground. Her jealousy and unresolved feelings for Daniel could drive her to plant doubts in his mind, perhaps even trying to get him to question his loyalty to his father and Christine. But Phyllis doesn't need to be obvious in her interference. She knows that small, calculated actions can create the most turmoil. By subtly undermining Christine's confidence or making her feel insecure in the lead-up to the wedding, Phyllis can make Christine second-guess everything. Phyllis has a knack for planting seeds of doubt, and she will use every tool at her disposal to do so, whether it's whispering half-truths, creating misunderstandings, or taking advantage of any vulnerability she can find. Meanwhile, Christine, who is otherwise ecstatic about her upcoming wedding, starts to feel a vague sense of unease. While she and Lauren are joyfully shopping for the perfect dress, there's an undercurrent of tension she can't quite shake. It's not until later, when she catches wind of Phyllis's lurking presence, that she begins to realize something isn't right. The feeling that Phyllis is watching her, just waiting to pounce, becomes a constant shadow over Christine's excitement. Christine's mind races, trying to discern what Phyllis could be plotting, but Phyllis is too smart to leave obvious clues. Still, Christine can't ignore the nagging feeling that this wedding, which should be one of the happiest days of her life, is about to be ruined by someone she has long considered an adversary. Phyllis, for her part, is not only plotting from the shadows but also trying to get closer to Daniel. Her bitterness towards Christine is likely fueled by the past, her failed relationships, her bitterness about losing Daniel, and her jealousy of Christine's perfect life. Phyllis wants to make sure that Christine doesn't get to have her happiness, and if she can use Daniel to do that, all the better. Phyllis might try to push Daniel into an uncomfortable position, possibly forcing him to choose between supporting his father or sabotaging Christine's happiness. As the wedding day draws nearer, tensions rise. Phyllis's sabotage doesn't need to be overt. A few well-placed comments to Daniel, a couple of insinuations to Christine, and perhaps even a public confrontation with Danny could be enough to set the stage for chaos. Phyllis knows that Christine is on edge, and she's ready to push her over the edge with a series of subtle manipulations. In the end, Phyllis may not even have to do anything drastic. She knows that the seeds of doubt she's planted will be enough to destabilize the event. Whether she openly exposes her feelings, stages an emotional scene, or simply continues to lurk in the background, her actions will force Christine and Danny to confront feelings they've been avoiding, and that's all Phyllis really needs. Christine and Danny may be blindsided by Phyllis's intervention, but it's clear that Phyllis is more than just a mere obstacle. She's a force of nature, capable of manipulating even the most joyous occasions to her will. Her plan, however, may not only ruin the wedding. It could forever change the relationships involved.